Hey everyone, I'm out here in the garage today, and usually when I'm out here in the garage that means I'm working on a car, and that is the case today. So my relative brought her G35X over recently and had me take a look at a few things, and while she was here I decided to go ahead and pop the hood and check the oil. Problem is, when I popped the hood to check the oil, the hood got caught on the fender on the passenger side. So I took a look around. I realized that the hood hinge on the passenger side was binding, and I tried to use some silicone spray to lubricate the hinge, but that didn't work. So what we're going to be doing in today's video is actually replacing the hood hinges on the G35X. So stay tuned. So here are the hinges I pulled off the G35. The first hinge shown, which was the passenger side hinge, was so bad I'm surprised the hood moved at all. I purchased a couple Nissan OEM hinges, and I'll put the part numbers in the description below if you need them. And then I painted them up. So instead of verifying the color, which was the engine-based gray, I assumed they were painted the body color. And I had some leftover paint from another job, so I just used that. So you'll see the steps I took to paint them, even though the color is wrong. So first I sprayed the hinges with some prep spray and wiped them dry. Next, since I planned on using a two-part epoxy instead of an etching primer, I sanded them with 180 grit sandpaper. If you use an etching primer, the primer's acidic nature negates the need for sanding, whereas epoxy primer requires the mechanical bond created by sanding. Next, I blew off the hinges and mounted them on bolts held by vice grips. Alright, so now we're ready to apply the epoxy primer. So I'll hit the hinges with some prep spray and wipe them dry. Now, normally I would use a lint-free cloth and a tack cloth, but these are just hinges. Again, the primer I'm using here is two-part epoxy in a can, but you may want to use self-etching primer. So what I'm doing here is shaking up the can the recommended time, then I'll pierce the bladder to release the hardener. And as you can see, it got darker outside and the wind started to pick up. So what I decided to do here is at least apply 3 coats of primer to the hinges so that I can paint them the next day. So it's the next day and I'm back at it again, this time applying 3 base coats. And not shown here is that between the primer and the base coats, I carefully sanded the hinges with 400 grit sandpaper, blew them off, wiped them down with prep spray, then blew them off again. Alright, so we're on to the last stage here, which is the clear coat stage. And again, I just blew off the hinges after applying the base coat. Then I applied 3 coats of 2-part or 2K clear. Alright, so here's the finished product, and these are ready to go on the car. Okay, so now we've got that out of the way, let's go ahead and get into the hinge replacement, which on the G35 was a little more complicated than I expected, but we'll tackle it one step at a time. Starting with the passenger side, I peeled away the 2 rubber gaskets, then removed the 3 clips holding the battery cover in place. With the cover out of the way, I just had to remove the 2 clips for the passenger side cowl. You may also want to remove this clip and gasket so they're out of the way for later steps. At this point, I decided to remove the hood, which I could have done in the beginning, but I was trying to decide where to put it since the garage is really full. To remove the hood, I placed a drop cloth on the windshield to protect it. Then I removed the rubber covers and the 12mm nuts from the hood studs. Then I lowered the hood so I could more easily remove it, and you may want to get a second pair of hands to help with this step. Alright, so the rest of the procedure shown is from the driver's side perspective, with the passenger side being identical. Okay, so continuing on, I put some painter's tape around the headlight to protect it, since the fender will have to move later. Next, I removed the 3 bolts near the headlight, which I believe were a 10mm and 2 12mm. I peeled back the gasket and removed the cowl's front clip. I then started to remove the 4 10mm bolts on top of the fender. Now, since I didn't want to remove the cowl, I had to use a ratcheting box wrench to access the fender bolt under the cowl. Up next is separating the fender from the bumper cover and the car, so several fender clips need to be removed. Once the fender cover is peeled back, there are 2 10mm bolts to remove. One attaches the fender to the bumper cover and the other attaches the fender to the car. Here's a picture and some video showing the location of each bolt on the passenger side. The bolt attaching the fender cover to the car was a little bit tricky to access, so I used a 1/4-inch ratchet with a 10mm to get it out. With the front and top fender bolts removed, I still didn't have enough clearance to access the hood hinge bolts, and I didn't want to risk bending the fender. So what I had to do here is separate the front part of the side skirt, and I started by removing the 3 Phillips screws. As a warning, this next part is best done with the front door wide open. I didn't have quite the space I wanted to work comfortably in the garage, so it was a little bit of a pain. And what I had to do next was remove the sill cover by getting a good grasp on it and quickly pulling up to release the clips. I then removed the clips holding the side skirt onto the car, and only the clips from the front door forward need to be removed. Alright, so hopefully at this point you're still with me and you haven't given up. And we have 3 bolts underneath the side skirt to remove next. And those are 10mm. With the front door wide open, I got a grasp on the side skirt with two hands and quickly pulled it away from the car to release the clips. And this gave me access to the fender's two lower 10mm bolts that also had to be removed. No, we're still not done. There's a bolt on the front part of the door jamb that needs to be removed, so I applied painter's tape so I could use my 1/4 inch ratchet, but the ratcheting box wrench actually worked better. Okay, so we're still not done. Actually, I'm just kidding. We're ready to go now. We just have to remove the two 12mm bolts holding the hinge in place. And now we can remove the hinge. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and install the new hinge, and it's probably not a bad idea to hit the hinge point with some silicone spray to prevent it from binding in the future. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and install the new hinge with the 12mm bolts, and frankly at this point I was ready to move on from this job, so I didn't tighten any of the fasteners to spec, and it wasn't all that crucial anyway. After getting a hand putting the hood back on the hinges, I tightened the 12mm nuts. I then reinstalled 3 of the upper fender bolts on the driver's side and the passenger side to check the gap, and proceeded to finish up the installation. So I installed the 2 lower 10mm fender bolts and the 3 screws. Then I installed the 10mm bolt in the door jamb. I reinstalled the clips for the side skirt. Next, I snapped the sill cover in place. Then I installed the 3 10mm bolts underneath to finish up the side skirt installation. Okay, so moving up to the front of the car where the bumper cover sits, I installed the 2 10mm bolts I showed earlier. Then I installed the fender cover clips. Alright, so we're on the home stretch now. So what I did last year is installed the last 10mm fender bolt closest to the hood hinge. Reinstalled the cowl clip. Then I installed the 2 12mm bolts and the 10mm bolt for the headlight. And of course the passenger side is going to be nearly identical. Alright, so there you have it. The G35X hood hinge replacement is done. That is not a fun procedure, especially if you're doing it for the first time and you're not sure of the steps. So as you saw, I did the driver's side in this video, and that's because I had to experiment on the passenger side. I had looked on a forum and got a couple clues as to how to take the hood hinges out, but it is different when you actually get in there and start doing it for the first time if you don't have the steps in front of you. So hopefully this video was helpful for you, and you can do the same thing on your car without going through some of the pain that I went through on this G35X. I was really happy to get the car out of here after that was done. That was not a fun procedure. So thanks for watching.